Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us this very early morning. As Nolan introduced, today's panel will be on decentralized community governance, and my name is Christine Kim. I am indeed a reporter for CoinDesk, and will also be your moderator for this morning's panel. We'll be talking about a very hot topic in crypto right now, and that is how do you create community consensus, and how do you keep a decentralized blockchain community together? I am joined by three very well-known speakers. First, we have Zaki Manyon, director of Tendermint Inc., a company that built the core technology behind blockchain interoperability network Cosmos, which launched just 2 months ago in March. We also have the CTO of AI and blockchain startup Kristy-Leigh, or more popularly known by her Twitter and GitHub handle, oh God, a girl. And finally, last but not least, we are also joined by Richard Burton, CEO of Balance Software, a startup building web and mobile apps to help users interface with decentralized finance applications such as MakerDAO, Dharma, and Compound. So thank you, all three of you, for being here today. And I want to start by setting up some proper context for our discussion today. So Zaki, do you want to start off by sharing with us your opinion on why is sustaining, nurturing, and even going out of one's way to measure community consensus especially important for blockchain communities?
So, well, it's a complex question. But like where I would start is, there's probably so the entire value of blockchains is as a social coordination mechanism. They're not a solution to a technology problem, a solution to a social problem. And so ultimately what you are trying to do with the blockchain is build a system by which people can coordinate with each other. And if people aren't able to coordinate with each other through your system probably isn't working well. So ultimately, that's the purpose of blockchains. Blockchains are about people.
And Kristy, to that, why do you think it's proven to be so hard for some blockchain platforms, this idea of...
Like Ethereum, for instance? A big part of it is because you're trying to measure sentiment globally. And measuring sentiment for a bunch of people that might not necessarily be interfacing with tools like the internet, like Twitter, like in Discord channels or Gitter, becomes quite difficult. It's also, when you're dealing with, much to your point, you're dealing with a social problem. You have to coordinate a bunch of people globally, and that's a lot of different personalities. That's a lot of different opinions. You have to figure out a way of, hey, how do we make everyone else's voice heard in a way that's not controversial, in a way that can be easily distilled into key points and actionable items. That's quite hard to achieve at scale, especially at the scale that blockchains got its eyes set on.
Rick, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've always thought of these projects as this kind of interesting combination of community and capital. And so I've been kind of a student of how the Linux movement kicked off, and just how passionate these people were about kind of surrounding Microsoft at the gates and just filling up all the gaps with open source software, until eventually they kind of smashed down the gate and got inside Microsoft. And I feel like that's just for an operating system. And so if you combine that with a financial system or a social system or a coordination system, and make sure that everybody has a piece of the action where they've kind of bought the token they believe in the most, you're kind of getting a hedonistic combination of open source passion as well as massive amounts of greed combined together in this like really toxic and also powerful level of kind of religious belief. And so if your only governance mechanism is either your voice on Twitter or some kind of on-chain vote, it leads to this just very intense level of debate.
Right. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that dynamic between community and capital. Outside of just voting mechanisms where you vote with your tokens and there you have your say, how else does capital distribution influence community dynamics? And can you guys give some examples on when you think unequal capital distribution has clearly impacted the community consensus. Zaki?
So I think this is like a tension that we are trying to figure out in Cosmos. We have ideas about it. We're not really sure what the right answer is. So on one hand, if you don't give your token holders a voice in the process and any way of expressing their opinion, then you tend to create other elites. Like this notion of core developers, which may or may not have any meaning, but there's certainly like engineers are a constituency. There's a bit of a technocracy in all of blockchain, in the blockchain sort of community. You also have, you have the people who have like loud voices, and ultimately this is politics. We've tried to figure out, well, we have like two theories about this basically at Cosmos. One is that we did build token holder voting into the protocol. So we can capture the sentiment of token holders. But we've also limited token holder voting in the sense that it has constrained abilities, and someone actually has to write and deploy the software if they want to make dramatic changes to the system. The second thing is Cosmos is designed to be a multi-chain world. So if the wealthy token holders of one Cosmos chain make decisions that you don't like, you don't have to leave Cosmos. Go make another chain and run it the way you see fit.
Kristy, anything to add to that?
Oh, that's a difficult question. A big piece of this right now is especially we're seeing that traditional capital markets have a little bit more influence when it comes to PR, media outreach, and getting participants to be aligned with their point of view outside of the developer community, simply because they have resources at their disposal. Now, when we're talking about, especially when it comes to the mining community, most miners have no real religious or fanaticism over decisions. All they care about is, hey, how can I protect my investment? And they seem to congregate just in very small groups to talk about that kind of stuff. That doesn't get properly bridged with traditional capital markets and the opinions of stakeholders. The other piece is that developers can have a much stronger voice when it comes to any kind of code integration or consensus mechanisms than the capital markets can have, simply because they're driving the commits, they're driving the development. ProgPow was kind of an eye-opener in how the Ethereum governance and Ethereum ecosystem worked, because whenever you wanted to get something really surfaced on the table, you would approach the core developers first, which is not actually how Ethereum is supposed to work. And I think we've made great strides in the last, I would say, 6 months to actually fix a lot of that, bring everyone's opinions to the table. But it took a bit of work and a bit of figuring out of how do you navigate the decentralized ecosystem with Ethereum.
What is ProgPow?
That's a loaded question, my friend. It was a controversial Git commit to change the proof of work algorithm for Ethereum, which brought a lot of heated opinions to all sides, especially when there's a lot of money involved.
And speaking a little bit deeper into the controversy around ProgPow and the changes in the community that have come out of it, maybe, Rick, if you want to speak a little bit deeper into other signaling methods and other tools that the Ethereum community in particular has used to combat, I guess, just having the developers have their say over what is the code, or having simply a capital decide who gets to have the loudest voice. What other stakeholders in the community have been able to come to the table, and through what signaling methods have their voices been heard? Yeah,
I mean, the current state of voting is almost as if Donald Trump was to say, okay, in the next election, it's $1, one vote. And that would kind of get people up in arms about how America would be operated. But that's the kind of best we've come up with in the system in terms of signaling on chain, which is obviously a kind of plutocracy. What I'm curious about is not just the existing tools we have for other signaling, like forums and Twitter and other things, but if you can get to some approximation of one person, one vote, that requires for the kind of identity mechanism to be solved, or for there to be a reasonably solid kind of identity system in place where I can present myself to the network. Again, this is not something in the near term, but you can imagine a more sci-fi future where, to a certain extent, you can express your voice and the way you type and the way you are, and in certain biometrics, and if you combine that into some kind of identity, there could be a way to signal a one person, one vote in the future. But that's, pretty sci-fi and far out. In the near term, and what's happening today is you're seeing forums, they're called like the Ethereum cat herders and the Ethereum magicians, which kind of gives you a sense of how wonderfully weird this community is. And these are forums where stuff is really actively debated and where core contributors get involved. But you've got to really see this as a feature of Ethereum is that it does not have on-chain governance. It's just this kind of messy, like undefined process with the goal of it not being captured too strongly. But some people feel that it has been captured by the developers and are kind of shrilly calling this a technocracy, where there's just a few very smart engineers who get to deploy the code and the miners just accept that without any form of pushback.
And Zaki, from your perspective, as you were saying, there's a form of on-chain governance on Cosmos. When you're looking at the informal process of governance on Ethereum, what are some of your thoughts?
So, to the extent that, Cosmos is a critique of Ethereum or an alternative to Ethereum, or trying to participate in this question of how should we design blockchains. We didn't enter into, it's not obvious that in all circumstances on-chain governance is better. I would say that in this early stage of Cosmos, on-chain governance has been working out really well. But I anticipate there to be significant political fractures within this community. I don't expect on-chain governance to ever resolve that. I don't expect that on-chain governance will always know the answer. I think that there will be contentious debates. There will be irreconcilable differences. There will be people who have different interests, and it will both be our vision is very focused on sort of the multiple chains thing. The other thing is, though, about just speaking about Ethereum, I think the biggest challenge that Ethereum is facing right now is in sort of 2016, Ethereum developed a culture that was basically around survival. The chain was under continuous attack. It was constantly on the verge of failing. And there needed to be a group of people who were going to guide Ethereum through a series of hard forks in order to actually adapt to these attacks. It was essentially quality assurance on the network. And that set up a set of cultural norms around how Ethereum hard forks would work that now no longer seem to serve the needs of the community, and a new set of cultural norms have to be established. One of the things that we were able to do with Cosmos is, the funding environment was much more generous when we built Cosmos, and we did a lot more QA before the network was released. So our network is not continuously under attack. Our network is relatively stable, fast, performing as expected. We did a lot of quality assurance with our validator community before we ever launched the network. So different sets of cultural norms are emerging, and we'll see where those run into problems in the future.
I'm really glad that you brought up the idea of cultural norms, because I do think that it plays such a strong part in this process of governance and creating community consensus. Kristy, do you agree with some of the cultural norms that Zaki is pointing out in the Ethereum community from your experience going through the ProgPow debates and the ProgPow process of the ProgPow conversation in general?
I do. Ethereum had a set of defined social norms, which was simply, hey, developers will talk about what kind of code's going to be committed. Miners, as you said, miners will just accept that code, and there will be no pushback, and that's the way of things. And if you had an opinion, if you wanted to voice a concern, you would have to go through the regular channels. You would have to submit a commit, and you would talk about it on a forum like Git, and attend some dev calls, and sort of come to some sort of consensus. With ProgPow, it was interesting to see how many heated participants came globally to voice their opinion and say, hey, we do not want to accept this code. We want to push back. We want to make sure our voices were heard. And a lot of the miners specifically didn't have a good way of making their voices heard. So a few key members in the community came together and tried to be the voices for their respective regions. You know, you had participants, specifically pools. Pools tried to gather community consensus in the form of signaling through the mining rewards, which was quite cool. You could vote for ProgPow yes, ProgPow no.
The carbon vote.
If you didn't agree with the change, you would have to hop pools. But that still wasn't the right way to measure consensus, because most miners weren't educated on what this change was, how to move forward. And then a lot of the miners as well were frustrated that, hey, why aren't these discussions taking place on things like WeChat, especially in the Chinese region, where you have at least 70% of the Bitcoin network is currently secured in China. There's a good portion of that for Ethereum as well. Those voices weren't collectively heard in the discussion or the participation. So there were some social norms defined that quickly got torn away, specifically when it came to mining. And then the Ethereum 1 versus Ethereum 2, 2.0 debate added a lot of fuel on the fire, I would say.
Right.
Especially at a heated moment.
And especially because conversations and the communication in terms of cultural norms may differ from one area of the world like North America to another area of the world like China. Rick, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine feeling a little bit, I'm not sure if the mic's working, sorry. Sorry? Oh, there we go. Oh, it's working, great. The only thing I would add is just I can imagine as a miner interacting with Ethereum feeling extremely nervous about this move to proof of stake, right? Like, as a Bitcoin miner, you can kind of know that there's almost no chance that they're going to switch that out. Whereas it's the express intent of the Ethereum community to kind of rip out that system and put in something entirely new, which will be profitable in a very different way. And so I'm really excited to watch that huge community clash about all the people whose business it is to run Ethereum, and then the people whose kind of mission it is to upgrade Ethereum, and they're about to have an enormous clash. So it should be pretty interesting.
Interesting and very heated, I'd imagine. I also want to ask all three of you guys, because you do have a great influence in each of the crypto communities that you're part of, to what extent do you think figureheads of blockchain platforms have a responsibility to actively facilitate this consensus that we're talking about? I think it's been made clear that it's a very difficult process in general, but can you give some examples of where you or perhaps another important or influential figure in the crypto community that you're part of has influenced decisions or has actively gone out of their way to create a certain outcome, a social outcome?
So what I found challenging in these first couple months of Cosmos as being a live system, I think a lot of us have tried to step back and let the community build its own norms. But it's also been clear that sometimes, to me at least, that there have been times where the community has wanted things. Like there's been informal, like I could sense the informal consensus. Like for instance, enabling transfers. There was certainly informal consensus, and a large number of people wanted to enable transfers on the Cosmos network. It was also clear that people were concerned about sort of the social risk of being the first person to make a proposal to do it, of doing it in a way that people didn't have support for. So, I have a lot of social and political capital in the system at this point. I can afford to take political, social risks that other members of the community might be worried about a backlash against. And so I find that it's a struggle knowing, when to take that risk and when not to. And ultimately I have to use my own judgment to make those decisions.
I would say as figureheads, part of what we have to do is make sure that we're incredibly well educated on a level that doesn't usually apply to regular participants, because our statements are treated as gospel, which is kind of scary. We have to ensure that we have an understanding of the entire landscape. You know, especially when it came to my point of view, I had to have a clear understanding of, hey, what is the Ethereum 1.0 roadmap? What is the Ethereum 2.0 roadmap? How does proof of stake make a gentle transition over into this ecosystem? How do we encourage all the participants, you know, the mining community, that proof of stake is not to be feared, that it's for the better of the platform that they love? We also need to do, figureheads need to make sure that they're involved in the community and making sure that they're collecting all of this sentiment, making sure that they don't just stay in their own echo chamber, which can become very easy to do if you're not careful. So making sure that you go out and hear those controversial opinions, have heated debates, talk to other people outside. In my case, it was, don't just talk to the miners, talk to the businesses that are actually building on Ethereum. Talk to the ASIC manufacturers, talk to other participants that have skin in the game, understand how they feel, what they're thinking about. That's kind of your job as a leader in Ethereum. And in a lot of ways, being a leader in Ethereum is meant very much like being a manager. So being very careful about, you know, how do you make sure your entire team is heard?
But also maybe something that you never asked for either.
Yes.
I mean, Rick, did you ever think that, you know, what I'm going to be is a figurehead in the Ethereum community? I mean, I don't.
I actually did specifically try to become a thought leader to get my visa. Like, that is literally, it was a planned campaign. And there's only two things I've tried to influence, and one has been like an abject failure, and one like has had some limited success. There's only two times I've actually tried to influence. And the first is, I absolutely loathe this term DeFi that we've come up with. And the reason is that when you speak to people about new technology, the more acronyms you come up with and the more compressed words and the more kind of confusing terms just make people very confused about what it is you're talking about. So if you say, oh, I'm really into DeFi, for anyone who's not aware of what that term is, it's short for decentralized finance. But what most people hear is that you can't pronounce the word defy correctly. And so it's just so irritating that we've come up with another complicated word which excludes more people from what I think. So I've kind of pushed for open source finance, and that is because the Linux community has spent billions on loading open source into businesses. Businesses are comfortable running open source software as part of what they do. And so when I'm talking to potential customers or people I might partner with or people in the traditional financial space, and I say, look, really what this is like open source finance. Like finally, because the database is defended, we can do open source financial systems. And whether they run on Ethereum or Cosmos, I don't care. What I care about is that developers get to experience that. So I like actively railed against DeFi and just got like run over by the Twitter crowd, just like completely blasted to pieces. But I'm really happy now that Justin Suntron is now adopting the DeFi meme because he seems to ruin everything. So hopefully Tron will kind of continue with that meme and Ethereum can shoot it out the back in the head. So I had no success there. But one thing I had a little bit of success with is being very clear about my issues with a protocol like EOS, where they kind of sucked billions of dollars out of Ethereum and deployed it into a new protocol. And I think that the protocol is an interesting experiment, but the capitalization was just absurd. And so I was lucky to kind of find 4 of these EOS shills in LA and got filmed kind of asking them a few questions. And when I posted this video, it went viral and it just got such a fascinating response. And so to the extent that I managed to save people from buying any of that token and participating in that community, I've been like pretty happy about that result. And again, it's not because EOS, the protocol, is that bad. It's just an absurd amount of capital to ingest to actually get that out the door. So those are the only 2 times I've like consciously tried to lead any thoughts, and like one didn't work and one kind of worked. So I don't know what lesson there is of that, but Twitter is fun.
Take of that what you may. I think that's all the time we have for today's panel. But thank you, Zachy, Kristy, and Rick for joining me today.
Thanks.